Tommy. Oh, okay. Okay, welcome to the SDR Preservation Core Work Cycle Sprint 4 demo. I'm going to first be talking about a couple of documents we created, some project goals that were accomplished during the sprint. So one of the first documents we created was the object preservation steps to production. And so we decided as a team that we wanted to deploy our code to production sooner rather than later. And the reasons for this was to obtain feedback from our stakeholders, which are Julian and Lynn, gather early performance data, root out some bugs that we might come across on the VMs, and make sure the VMs are configured correctly. So here's the steps that we want to take in order to get to production. Currently, we're working on populating the preservation catalog with Moab objects, as well as the existence check for the catalog to the Moab. We're in the process of creating the trusted checksum repository right now. And we listed out the rest of the steps that we need to take in order to get to production. We have another document, which is the MVP API drawings, which show the interaction of endpoints with the REST API calls. So essentially, this document shows all the applications, services, endpoints that we are and we will implement. So as you can see, we're in the process of implementing Moab to catalog audit check 1, and it tells us what it's going to loop through, which calls we need, the method in the catalog it's going to use, the REST call, and the outcome, and how that connects to our whole system of services and applications. In addition to this diagram, we have a document that has the mappings of the SDR PC services to PC web services. For example, this document will show us and help us figure out the different REST API calls for whichever methods we need. So for example, for the SDR PC trusted checksum services, we want to be able to create records in the trusted checksum as well as update and show them. And so here we have some of the REST API calls that we will want to implement, but haven't yet. So this is a work in progress spec, and most of the REST calls are not implemented, but we will want to implement them. In addition to that, we created a statistics page in our GitHub wiki, which shows all the different benchmarking that we've done. So we've got all our storage routes, all the Druid counts, file counts, and these are the times it takes to crawl through each Druid on the service disk. So our largest service disk, it took about 57 minutes to crawl through it. Here we have some checksum data to see if there was an optimal block size to split files into when doing the fixity checking. And down here, this is still in progress, which shows the audit check, and which will give us the time it takes to see the database and update the database. So for our largest service disk, 12, it took 214 minutes to create every record, every Druid, and it took 196 minutes total to update all those Druids. Service disk 5 was larger, less Druids, but I guess file size was larger, and so that took significantly more time, so 470 minutes to create the database and 401 minutes to update the database. Now, we also wrote some seeding data, which seeded the endpoint type, the endpoint, and the preservation policy, and this was to replace the test pictures with reference to the seeded database objects. So if we go into our Rails console, we can see that the endpoint table is empty. And if we run rake dd seed, and go into the Rails console, we'll see that we now have some spec data that we can use, some seeded data that we can use. So this helped us remove duplicate test fixtures in our spec data. We also worked on the MOAB to catalog existence audit check. And so this is creating and seeding the database. So right now, if we look at all the preserved objects and the preservation copies, we'll see that it's nil. So we need to create all the druids in our database. And so we can do that by running the create method in our audit check. So what this is doing is it's either hitting the create or no object in the data method, and it's going through an if-else statement and deciding whether or not it needs to create the preserved object as well as the preservation copy. And these are using the seeded endpoint preservation policy and endpoint type data. And here's the audit check MOAB to catalog method, which is going through each directory and then either creating or updating the druid. So here we see it's finished running. And we can see that now we have our database here with all 5 druids, the current version, the size, and the specific timestamps we want, as well as the connection between the preservation policies. Here's our specs for the handler, which will create or update the database. And we pretty much tested every single like method or error that we can run into. So meaning that if the versions match, if the MOAB to catalog versions match, or if the incoming version is newer than the DB version, or the incoming version is older than the DB version. Lastly, we worked on the trusted checksum repository, and we created the database, but we still have more work to do with that. And so here we can see that we have the database, but it's not yet been seeded. I just put a fake seed in here just so we can see the table names and the timestamps. And yeah, that's the end of the demo 4.